Chaos. Woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning, chilling with coffee mugs, me and coffee chugs, talking education all across the nation, pushing boundaries, thinking innovation. Chaos.
Hello, everyone. How you doing? Welcome to another episode on Living on the Edge of Chaos podcast. I am really excited. I almost wish we recorded what we were just talking about for the podcast, so we'll have to regurgitate a little bit of that. But I am here with somebody who has been doing incredible work, not just with AI, but education in a lot of different forms, formats, and structures throughout her career. But as with lots of us, we are trying to wrap our head around the implications of AI in education in a much bigger space. And so I've come across the work of our guest here through LinkedIn. Like many people, it seems to be my big learning spot. And her colleagues have put together some incredible resources that I think as people have started to shift away from like, oh my gosh, kids are cheating, to now thinking like, how are we going to process this? There are definitely some information that a lot of you who maybe haven't come across our guest today need to go check this out as you're starting those conversations. My guest today is none other than Stella Lee. So Stella, I am so excited for you to be here on this show. I've been so looking forward to this. And I could read your whole bio, but I always like to ask the guests to explain themselves, which I know sometimes feel a little wonky, but who are you? What do you do? And what in the world do you got going on?
Sure. Thanks for having me. By the way, I love the name of your podcast. That's what caught my attention as well when you first reached out to me. And she said, my name is Stella Lee. I'm Canadian, based in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. For those you don't know what that is, if you go to Montana and you keep going north, you would hit me. So that's where I am mostly, if I'm not working in other locations elsewhere. I have a background in, actually, I started out as an artist, as a painter. And that's my first love. And I somehow found my way. I always have a love for learning and technology. So I ended up getting a PhD in computer science, focusing on education technology, particularly on personalized learning. So that took me to where I am today, was an academic world. Then I went into the corporate world because I was not very happy with how slowly things were going at the school level, at the university level. And I thought, I'm super curious about like what's the rest of the world doing in terms of training and education and lifelong learning. So I went to work in the private sector for a few years. Also dissatisfied with the lack of evidence, the lack of research-based or theory-based practices. So I started my own consulting company called Paradox Learning. It's been, oh my God, it's been 8 years. Scary.
Time's flying.
Yeah. So I do a lot of projects on education technology, evaluation, implementation, advice on large digital learning strategies for government, NGOs, private sector, schools, universities, so a broad range of different organizations. Of course, having a background in AI, I also, as you know, the whole world pretty much just discovered AI this year, specifically on generative AI. So I also been helping out with educators in just basically wrapping our heads around this. It's evolving way too quickly for any one of us to understand it. So collectively, I think we're better at making sense of things. And so I've been doing a lot of work, workshops, talks, writing position papers, developing frameworks. So that's where I am today.
Yeah, you've been incredibly busy, and so you mentioned that you were.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, that is true. That is true. It's become the norm, which I don't know is necessarily always a good thing, but here we are. I always say it keeps me out of trouble.
Exactly. Same here.
You mentioned that you were an artist, which I didn't
Yeah.
know that part about you. So I wasn't planning to start this way, but now I'm intrigued. So your art is your passion. You have
Yep.
a doctorate in computer science. Now here we are, and I know you explore more than AI, but since that is the cusp of lots of conversation, I do want to ask you because I think if that's your big passion, but yet you are incredibly have a vast knowledge in computer science and all that. I was just leading some workshops with educators, and among many questions and fears and the feelings that people have as they're learning, there is a lot of conversation on, oh my gosh, like kids aren't going to know how to think. But where I want to phrase this with you is kids are no longer going to be able to develop their creativity skills. So I'm curious with you, as you have that kind of cross hybrid
Yeah.
interest and background in arts and computer science and now exploring AI. What's your hot take on that? I mean, do you see that as a taking away of our creative skills, or do you see it as a leverage to empower, or undecided?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Yeah, and you're right. So you know the Venn diagram of like three circles?
Yeah.
My three circles are art or slash design, education, and tech,
Mm.
right? So I sit like most happily among those three. To be honest, have not been very pleased with all the generative AI imagery creation program. I don't know, have you tried them
I have,
yourself?
yeah, yes.
So I think many of them are quite terrible, to be honest. And as somebody actually have the artistic skill to actually create original imageries, I also feel like this is okay as a starting point. I think a lot of these, whether it's text generation or image generation or video generation, I think it's really good for people that kind of newer at these skills that are more the beginner below intermediate level. I think it's a good way to get started, to get some ideas of what they look like. But have you tried to generate like humans? You see all these images like five fingers, like a gazillion teeth, and just really weird looking humans, or sometimes they would generate random like text embedded in the imagery, so the text is like not correctly spelled. And so my experience is that I'm more frustrated dealing with those imageries and spending more time just crafting the correct prompts. I mean, I think again, like it's great usage for training in art school to say, hey, like here are a very quick way for you to explore different styles and to learn about how do you remix different images together. But at the end of the day, I think perhaps it might even highlight that our creativity is really unique, and creativity, it's still the top three skills that we need. It's analytical thinking, creative thinking, and technological literacy, right? Those are the top three skills. I think that was a competency framework put together by UNESCO.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, yes, I don't think it's taking that away from us, but perhaps we need to stay on top of what does that mean in terms of creativity. Like, does it mean replicating a painting that was done by a master in a past? Even the field of art has evolved, right? We're not just copying masterpieces like it used to be in a traditional art academy, but now we are more about incorporating social commentaries in your art, challenging societal conventions, art as installation, art in public spaces. So I think even in a creative world, like we are constantly pushing the limit, and that's not something AI can do. AI can only regurgitate what's already existing, right? And so I think if anything else, it kind of motivate me and others to say, okay, well, we really need to start pushing the limits, because otherwise generative AI is only going to keep feeding you the same thing.
Yeah, no, I love that perspective. And I was playing around. I had a long delay in the airport trying to get back home here just recently. And so I was
Yeah.
using the latest DALL-E 3. And what was kind of fascinating to me, it further reinforced one of my stances that as we think about our AI literacy, our AI skill development, what that means, the need and urgency for the human intelligence to skills need to grow just right along with it, if not more. And I think we're going to see like a resurgence, or hopefully maybe a further emphasis on the importance of human intelligence, whether that's creative, analytical, whatever that might be.
Yeah, like a
But
renaissance.
yeah, I feel like we're not there yet, but I feel like it's coming as people start to become more comfortable with these
Yeah.
tools. And I was trying to create these images, and I won't get too long-winded here, but I was trying to create photography, and it brought me back to in high school. I was super passionate about photography, and to date myself, that was back when you did everything manual. I didn't have a phone that just zoomed in. Like, I had to know f-stops and aperture
Yeah.
speeds. I had to know all those things, and then I produced my own photography, because you just didn't keep it on your phone to share on the social media. And I found myself going back and being like, relearning those skills again to then create better AI images that I was looking for. And I had that kind of like aha moment of what I was sharing. Like, if you don't know those skills, you are limited to the potential of leveraging some of these AI platforms, you know what I mean, to maybe create something else. And so it got me back thinking,
Absolutely.
like, one, I kind of want my own camera again. I don't miss carrying all the different lenses in the camera bags, but it's like I kind of had this like full circle moment of like, oh my gosh, like those skills are coming back to be needed again. And not that everybody needs to know that, but it was kind of like this weird aha moment that I was having, trying to reproduce like a high quality image.
Yeah, like what you just said resonated with me because I recently was in a Picasso drawing exhibition in Paris in the Pompidou. It's really extensive, but what struck me was it showed the evolution of him as an artist, right? So they were displaying his drawings from when he was, oh, I don't know, 11 or 12 years, or like really young age, when he started that very traditional art academy drawing of really realistic figures, right? And he started that way. He was not always an abstract cubist painter. He started with photorealistic kind of capturing of imageries, and he gone through periods of doing the blue period, the rose period, and then you can see the evolution in this exhibition, and that's a human quality of this evolution of whatever life experience you have, and you incorporate that into whatever creative endeavors you're doing, right? And AI doesn't do that. I mean, it could update its knowledge, but it's not incorporating like life experiences. It's not incorporating emotions. It's not incorporating any other types of, in fact, even the term intelligence, it's very problematic. It just gives us an unrealistic expectation of what this technology can do. But what I think it's good though, it's you all heard of blank canvas syndrome, like this fear of starting something like blank slate.
Yes.
And I think AI really helps with like, well, I have no idea where to start. Let's give me some ideas, right? Like I can start with playing with imageries, and I'm like, oh, maybe a certain element of it works. Same with writing. Like when you have writer's block and you like, give me some ideas, give me like play with some titles, and that's great for that. So in a way that help us with our creative thinking.
Yeah, as you were just talking, it reminds me of at the end of the last school year, we were doing some work in a high school senior writing class, and it was the end of the year, to say the least. Kids weren't motivated, as most people are, let alone seniors with senioritis. And they were like, I don't know what to write about. I don't know what to do for this project, just being seniors. And so we ended up pulling up Chat GPT and said, brainstorm 100 ideas. And as we can imagine, not all the ideas were very good. But what happened was the kids were like, well, that's a terrible idea. And we're like, okay, why is that a bad idea? And then they'd be like, well, it should be blah, blah, blah. And then we were like, oh, well, it sounds like maybe you have an idea.
And how can it be better, right?
Yeah, so
iterate.
So we kind of backdoored the approach. It kind of worked out pretty well. Not that they were all that excited that all of a sudden they had an idea, I had to do the work. But, I like that idea of kind of using that. How do we start to create some creative constraints so it's, it's not so massive when we start from scratch? And and maybe as a segue, I don't know if it's a very good one, but as I think about the educators that I've continued to try to have conversations with of awareness, it feels so overwhelming. Like, we have all these things, and now there's this AI thing, and I don't quite understand it. you and your team, and you've got an AI educator toolkit. But the thing that really brought my interest to your work and then diving deep into that was your AI literacy framework, competency framework. So could you talk a little bit about what that is, kind of how it came to be? And for those listening, they know though this will be in the show notes, but I think this was something that I think kind of helps build some constraints to think about learning and having some conversation around how do we figure out what this all means.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. It's something I'm always thinking about, like how can I help with educators? It's just the conversation is all over the place, and one thing that became very clear to me, it's like we really need resources, we really need templates, we really need like guidelines, policies, frameworks, all of that, right? And I always been really interested in developing technology literacy, like data literacy, tech literacy, and now AI. It's just the newest iteration of that.
Sure.
Well, how it came about is actually in September, I was asked to deliver a workshop for educators. So this was specifically for university professors who teach engineering subjects in Europe, to give them a workshop on basically just anything they need to know about AI and how do you teach with that, how do you use it for research, but also how do you use it to lighten your admin work, right? Like automating some of the more tedious tasks that you have to do, as an educator.
Yes.
So I put together an AI toolkit for educator. It's more targeted for university level, but I think it applies equally to K through 12. And we put it under Creative Commons license, so anybody who wants to use it can access it through my website, paradoxlearning.com. I would give you the link so you can share that with the listeners.
Yeah.
And feel free to download it. We recently actually have it translated into Spanish as well. So it is very much a community effort. And we created also an AI for Educator group on LinkedIn. And again, it's an open group. Everybody's just there to share resources and say, hey, there's a free course on AI. If you wanted to learn more about that, go there. Or there's a webinar on ethics of AI. So lots of interest there. So we're just trying to share resources. From that workshop, I developed a toolkit to go with that. And in the toolkit, one of the section is on how do you develop AI literacy, because it's great to, use these tools and know what tools to use. It's good to know, what are various AI techniques, and it's good to know a little bit about, how people are using it and other use cases. But one area I find it distinctively lacking is like, well, if we need to learn about AI, what does that mean? Like, so many teachers come and say, I don't want to be a data scientist. Like, that's not what I trained for. Like, do I need to start taking statistic courses? Do I need to learn Python? I'm like, no. Like, don't panic. Like, I don't want to learn that, and I'm a computer scientist. Like, I don't want to have to spend my whole weekend learning Python either. Nor do you need to. And that got me thinking about, okay, like how can we put people at ease by saying, you know what, like it is a skill, literacy is a skill, and you can develop it, and you don't have to be like an expert in every dimension, right? And so it got me thinking about so what does it mean for AI literacy? And from there, I identify 7 key areas. The key areas are the foundational, knowledge of AI. So knowing about the history of AI, how it came about, what are some of the common techniques. At least you can talk and ask questions about it, right? Yeah. And the second one is about be comfortable with data, because AI is basically fed by lots of data sets. So just understand even like what's the relationship between AI and data? How how important is it to understand what kind of data is being fed into the system? Because data you could be sourcing it from a very biased source. You might source it only by a certain segment of your population, and therefore your system would be biased, right? And then the third is critical thinking and fact checking. So that's, I don't have to explain that, everybody top of mind. And then the fourth one is that we need to step outside the education world and look at, well, how does AI, impact society at large, right? How is AI being used in other domains? What are other use cases that are happening? Because I think sometimes education is a bit slow in adopting technology. You're nodding, so I know I'm preaching to the choir here. But I often look beyond the educational world and say, okay, tech is impacting us in the consumer world, in smart homes, in entertainment. So those things will eventually trickle down to education. So look beyond what we're doing in the education world. Ethics, of course, I can't not mention AI literacy without talking about ethics. This is like a whole other topic that we can talk about. And then AI pedagogy is like, how do you teach with AI and not losing the educational theories and not get fooled by the shiny new toy and forget about the foundations of education? And then finally, I wanted to end the competency with, well, as we're developing young minds, like how we're going to preparing them for the future, how we're going to incorporate the understanding of this technology in preparing them for the future work and the future in general. So these are the 7 areas that I put together, and it's very much a work in progress. I would love if anybody have any additional areas that they say, perhaps you should consider this, or a sub area of ethics should be surveillance. So that's the framework. And then I further broken it down into, okay, within each key area, what are the competencies that you need to develop and what level? So I have the beginner, intermediate, and advanced, and then within that, the competencies. So that's where I'm at. Next step is I want to start collecting some ideas and activities to go with that, so teachers can implement them, whether for themselves or with their classrooms or among their colleagues as a community of practice. That's another idea. I wanted to see if we can build a community of practice using a framework like this one.
Yeah, it's so good, and I want to a couple of those items in that framework. I want to have some conversation on. But before we do that, and as people are listening, this will make a lot more sense if you go check out these documents, which I know a lot of my listeners, so I know you will. But when you're talking about this AI literacy competency framework, we've got it broken down into introductory, intermediate, and advanced. It makes a lot of sense to me as I'm reading through this, of like, how can we kind of work our way through our learning? It gives us kind of a progression of things to think about, which I think is great for so many that are just looking to get started. I'm curious, and I know this is all a work in progress. This is still relatively new, so I know even as we record this, things can shift and groove. How have people been using it? Are they using it? Like, are they self-assessing and then they're going in and diving into where they want to progress? Do they work through category 1 and then work their way down? I mean, have you seen any kind of feedback in terms of how people are using it? Because I think that's the exciting piece. I'm looking at this and I'm just thinking about the last couple of districts I was with, and I'm like, I if I had more time, it would have been so good to sit with this and have them kind of create self goals, whether in groups or by department or maybe as a district or school. So I was just curious, as you've put this out and you're gaining feedback, how are people wrapping their head around that in terms of how they're using it?
Yeah, I don't really know because it's so new, but and also, things don't happen quickly, right? So they were like, I have to wait for the next district meeting. And but the feedback I've gotten so far though, so far it's been positive. And so what I've seen people using is a lot of places also have some internal framework they developed. And so they use this to build on top of that, right? So they would say, there's more context specific ones with their organization. So by the way, it's not just schools and universities. I also have like nonprofits and NGOs and even private sectors are. So I'm not, one thing I'm trying to, think about is like, do I need to further segment the framework into this is for educational institutions and this is for more like corporations? I for now, I just want to keep it as one. It's just because it's easier to update and add content to it. But I'm open to if people wanted to kind of go take it and go with it in a different direction. So for organizations, at least at university and educational institution K-12, they were saying, we actually been thinking about something like this. So you just save us time by already giving us a more polished solution. And so they are plugging in some of the more school or education institution specific needs on top of this framework. And because I put it under Creative Commons license, I said, feel free, but please come back and share your use case with us so that we can share that with the bigger community. The other one is, I think, teachers, I think more at university level, because they have more flexibility in crafting their courses, are using it to, like in, I don't know, college writing 101 or even sociology 101 to kind of incorporate this into part of the teaching curriculum, right? With the students to, as they teaching their subject, to incorporate some of the elements to the subject matter. So when you talk about sociology and societal impacts, so they would then incorporate some of that AI competency into the subjects to build that literacy with the students. So that's what I've seen so far. I would love to hear from people. I imagine nothing concrete is going to come in until next year. It's just like with generative AI, OpenAI, ChatGPT came out exactly a year ago. So it's only like this semester things are start being incorporated into the syllabus, right? Like it's only September that you see more movement. August and September this year, you see more movement in the classroom about how we're going to talk to students about this, how we're going to incorporate it into the syllabus, how we're going to do we ban it? Do we teach with it? I mean, it's only now we start picking up a little bit of speed. So I imagine like with this competency framework, it's probably going to take a little bit of time for people to think about like, can we use it? How we're going to use it?
Yeah, you mentioned there with the Creative Commons license that people come back and share and come back and revisit, and
that's why one ask.
I love it, and it's a perfect example. I mean, as I was prepping, for this very episode, I've looked at this framework multiple times, trying to think about, what's that look like as I try to get past like the initial. A lot of the trainings I'm doing is just kind of like, hey, do you even know what's going on? And we haven't got into like the thick of the stuff. But where I was just at leading a full day workshop, I had probably one of the most thought-provoking, I'll call it a session. It was more of a conversation that I've had in education, in any AI or not, in a long time. And this district brought together, it was their superintendent, there was some of their other heads, they had a few school board members, they had parents, they had local business investors. They just had a nice cross-pollination for an initial conversation around AI. And so I shared just a couple things. But as I was looking back through this today, the one that I always kind of glossed over was that diverse AI use cases. And I keep thinking about one individual in this session who she is a local business person. I believe she was also a parent. And I don't know I can't remember if she was school board or not. Anyways, she was talking at her table about how AI has been so beneficial to the business. It has allowed them to get a lot more of their kind of data analytics moving and grooving that used to be so manual, labor intensive for people going in and cleaning. But she said she has some real hesitation about what that looks like in the K-12 space of AI. And it was just something I had never thought about. Like there are those kind of two lens, right? And her thing was like, are kids really, do they have the skills to properly understand how to utilize the AI? Of course, my conversation was like, this is part of the skill
But
sets we need to develop.
that's why we need to talk
Yeah.
about this. Yeah.
But I was like, this is so great because she was sharing, like in their case, in this community, how AI is already being utilized. And I think other people in the room weren't even aware that there was like a local context of AI being implemented, not of ignorance, just you just stay in your lane, right?
Yeah,
And so
you don't get these
yeah,
conversations across sectors,
yeah.
right?
And so I was
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, like she should be helping like the admin, like that kind of like behind the scenes AI, not like, hey, put generative into the classroom with kids, but like, how could we reduce some of our managerial work? Because there's businesses doing that.
Exactly.
And so it was just so fascinating as I was looking at this. I'm like, man, that category just stood out to me more than usual. And I think that's the beauty of coming back to these things is we learn and continue to have conversations like,
I mean, even
oh,
one of the activities I want to suggest is like maybe having a showcase of what other
mm,
industries are doing, right? Like
yeah,
that could be
yeah.
a good
Oh, I love that.
event. And when you talk about she use it for her business data analytics in schools, do you use LMS? Do you use any kind of like platforms?
Right.
Well, there are analytics to be have there, and so many people don't make use of them, or they don't know how, or they don't have time. So AI can help analyze this, this learning data, anonymize it, detect some patterns.
Yeah.
Like that's a more admin behind the scene that it's feeding into supporting the learning, right? And supporting the learner. You can see, when you put this resource up in your LMS, are people even using it? Like, what are the usage pattern? Is it being overutilized or underutilized? Should we put more money into putting resources like that? So it helps with even budgeting, resource allocation at a school level, making decisions, with more data informed decisions. It's not directly connected to the learning in the classroom, but it's still supporting education nevertheless.
Yeah. I love that. And I want to then build upon that and look at your other I mean, I would love to just spend time talking about all of them, but for the sake of time, yeah, your AI pedagogy category.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested in your thoughts on this because you have an extensive background in in learning in general, even prior to AI. And so I'm really,
Yeah.
I think you have a really interesting perspective to this. One of my fears that I have is like anything that comes into play with technology, especially in education, we
Yeah.
tend to clamor on like the shiny bright object that is
I
like
know. I
cool,
know.
fun, interactive. And I think about the pros and cons of even like when districts went 1-to-1 and that initiative a long time ago, and how so much of that went from like I have a paper worksheet packet and now I think I'm doing something really cool because now it's digital. But
Yeah.
like the teaching pedagogy, the learning experience didn't really increase. We just shifted maybe some not best practices or overutilization of certain practices, and we didn't actually harness the potential opportunities of what we could do with tech. Talk to me a little bit about where you are in that space, because I know you've got a backdrop in digital learning, you're interested in tech and e-learning. Part of this is I'm trying to figure out it's a real like double-edged sword where I feel when I support teachers or educators in this, they have to feel some quick wins of success, like that they've learned something. But it can't stop there. And what I don't want to see happen is that we just continue not to push better teaching practices,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
I should say, re-highlight teaching practices that have been around that are good that we've just kind of maybe lost sight of due to not even AI, just the landscape of education in general, which is a whole nother hot take for another day. How are you wrapping your head around that, or what are you seeing with that to ensure that maybe that doesn't repeat itself again?
Yeah, I know. And same here. I seem to see so many buzzwords, right? like mobile learning, gamification, virtual reality, augmented reality, micro learning, and micro credentials, and like every time MOOC, and you seem to enough hype cycles, and you can't help but feeling a little bit cynical about, okay,
Right.
is this really changing educational practices, right? Or are we being distracted by yet another thing? I look at AI pedagogy category in two folds. So one is because I do so much evaluation of products for schools and for different educational settings. So from an AI educational product evaluation perspective, what do we need to focus on? Because there's a lot of tools. To me, they are solutions looking for a problem. And you don't understand going into looking at these tools, you're gonna get caught up by, wow, like look at the interface, it's so shiny, it's so beautiful to look at. The buttons just, you click on it and then generate these things for you. But I'm like, well, is it supporting learning objectives at all? Like, and what learning problem are we solving or not, right?
Yes.
So from a technology evaluation perspective, I want it to be to develop skill sets in that. And then the other aspect is, using, like, recognizing what are the benefits or potentials, and also the limitations of using AI in an educational setting, like, because there are limitations. So we need to be very careful in using them and not inadvertently excluding certain things. Are you familiar with the SEMR model?
Yeah.
So that is a good framework to use, I think, in this category. Again, I have many thoughts on how do I further develop this, and one of that is, well, we need to get people to start applying that. So for those of you don't know, I don't even know if I say it correctly, but it's SAML. It's the acronym, and it stands for substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. So basically, if you look at a piece of tech, is this tech like Zoom is really a substitution of a face-to-face meeting, right? It's not doing something fundamentally different than if we were sitting in person talking. Although I think Zoom might disagree now because they just push out a bunch of AI tools.
Yeah.
So that is changing too. But like, is the technology just substitute what you're doing already in a classroom, or does it modify something, or does it actually completely change the game for you that you don't normally able to provide this learning experiences unless you're using this technology, right? So I think that's a good framework to use, but there are others out there. But my intention is I want people to pause and think about, like, is AI shaping the way we learn and teach, or like, are we as educators actively using the tool to shape that, or is the tool shaping us, right? Is it, are we driving that, or is AI driving us in education?
That's a really, really powerful question. And I know it just, as we get into, and I'm continuing to have conversations with districts, whether they're forming task force, or maybe it's just like help us build an awareness. I think they're starting to, teaching and education is always personal. And so I think we have to understand that human side of stuff. And you can see the emotions when you start to showcase and demo the capabilities and the limitations of platforms. Take ChatGPT or insert whatever tool of choice you want. And you can start to see people question, like, why am I even doing what I'm doing? Or am I needed, right? And getting people to move beyond that initial fear, like, my belief is educate is gonna be needed more than ever before. How do we build the skill sets to critically think and communicate? But now, for so long, it's always been maybe with other humans, and now we got to, like, cross pollinate our critical thinking, collaboration, communication skills, problem solving with humans, and now, some of these AI models. And so what does that look like, and how do we merge those things together? And so I think just trying to get people to see some of that. As you were talking through that,
Yeah.
I'm trying to think through when teachers have this initial fear when they experience these platforms, they start to question, like, am I even needed? What's the point of education? Like, they start to kind of have these like bigger
Oh, much more of an
conversations.
existential
Yeah.
crisis. Yeah.
And I try to help them realize, obviously, like, that's a feeling, lean into it. I think my take is like, we're going to be needed more than ever before, because
Absolutely.
the
Absolutely.
communication, the critical thinking, all these skills we need, not only do we need them now for human interaction to be able to work with others to create stuff, but now we've got to be able to also apply that to these AI tools, because they're also not going away. Someone
Yeah.
else, I can't take the credit for this phrase, but someone said, was reading somewhere that there's like an AI confetti bomb that went off, and now AI is in everything, and it will be. And so,
I love that.
so
I love
now
that.
we've got to interact. We got to know how to interact with this stuff too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if we're not empowering students to have those skill sets, like that
Yeah.
digital divide is going to exponentially grow.
We don't want to be
further.
left behind. Yeah,
And so
exactly. Like as teachers and as students, both. Yeah. I think this is interesting, because isn't this conversation happened before, when like LMS first came about, or
Yeah.
intelligent tutoring system even way before?
Yes.
I mean, when they're like, oh, now there's e-learning, we don't need
Yeah.
teachers, right?
Yeah.
And of course then it wasn't well designed, so we actually need teachers to like then help explain and make sense of it. And I feel like it's the same thing that's happening. I think so much of it is, it's, if anything else, yeah, like you're saying, the human interaction, but also I think the trust factor, like do you trust a machine or do you trust a human? It's just because it can give you information, but do you want to interact with it? It's another matter.
Sure.
If you think about medical field, do you want to go see your doctor, or do you want to go see a machine that tells you, like, whatever problem you have, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think these are, and I love that as an example, because these are the questions that, while we're trying to grapple what it means in education, these are also societal issues that we need to also process as a society. And so that, to me, this education piece, and that's what I like so much around your framework, it gives us things to think about, both in education, but I think also just as being hopefully positive contributors to society. What does this mean for us in all the other realms?
I think there's a healthy dose of like, am I being replaced? Thinking that, I mean, healthy in a small, quantity,
Yeah.
is to kind of keep us like on our toes, and like, okay, perhaps there's some broken educational practices, like we were talking before the recording started. Like perhaps assessment is broken. Perhaps the grading system is broken. Perhaps everybody learning at the same pace based on age group is broken. So this is a chance for us to reflect and perhaps redesign some of the process. And so it's not a bad thing.
Right.
I think the concern is the speed of change. It's happening rapidly. So we haven't had a minute to catch our breath, and there's like a new tool that comes out,
Yes, I always say it's like my like the nerdy dopamine hit. I find myself checking to see what new update, because I feel like I need to, as I'm trying to help others, I'm like, I got to know. And I'm like, I don't know if this is a healthy dopamine hit or not. I'm checking all the time to find out what the new update is. I'm like, maybe there's more to life than that, but that's just kind of where I've been
easy
lately.
to get caught up in that, isn't it?
It is.
And then next thing you know, an afternoon it's gone, just looking at one thing.
Yeah. Well, I want to be respectful of your time here. This has been such a wonderful conversation. And so before we wrap up and find out where people can learn more about you, I have one last question I want to ask you. And so, as you've been doing a lot of this work, and you've got some incredible resources for people, I always like to ask some of my latest guests, which I find fascinating, what's kind of like your learning process for this? I mean, sometimes it's kind of weird to analyze our learning, but I've been asking this lately because I think as people listen and they're trying to figure out how should they go about learning, because it is like drinking from a fire hose. How are you staying in the flow of the landscape, which we just talked about is going fast. Maybe more
Yeah.
importantly, trying to like
Yeah.
then cross-pollinate that back with
Yeah.
what you know about education practices or what it means for the business sector. Talk to me a little bit about that, because maybe that could be some insights that people could be like, oh, I could go about it that way.
Yeah, I think I intentionally take breaks away from it. I think that's healthy for me.
Yeah.
Like I got off with doing an AI workshops and talks, and I'm like, I'm sick of talking about AI. I am just gonna, not talk about that for, a few days. I am like you, super nerdy for superhero movies and stuff. So I would just be like, I just want to talk about Marvel superheroes.
Yeah.
And that actually is tremendously healthy for me, because then I come back into work with new ideas and ready to get started. And also, I've been in this for a long time, so I felt like it's really important to get out of the educational field in terms of the conversation, in terms of the gatherings and talking to people in this field. Like I still obviously do a lot of friends in this space, but it's super healthy for me to, like, when I talk about diverse AI use cases, also diversity of perspective is what helped me. And I came from a multidisciplinary background. Maybe that's always with me. I always love applying social sciences, like behavioral economics theories, into educational practices, right? Psychology, there's so much we can learn for human-computer interaction based on psychology theories. I also like to keep an eye on, for example, consumer grade products. Earlier this year, I went to CES, Consumer Electronics Show.
Jealous.
And don't be, is exhausting. And but it's from Boston Dynamic robots to intelligent TV. Sorry, I'm doing air quotes here because I'm highly doubting the intelligence of the TV. To smart toilets, whereby they can analyze your pee and tell you if you need certain vitamins. And e-health is such a fast-growing field, for example. We can take so much learning from there. And I also can see that e-health applications are coming to education in the forms of wearable tech. That is going to happen. There's already a little bit of that happening. Wearable tech combined with AI, I think it's going to come to education. It might not be next year. It might be 3 years out, but I think it's coming. So it gives me a glimpse of what's already happening elsewhere, and not just from a technology perspective, but from like what policies is setting in motion right now with different government bodies, right? Like there's the EU AI Act that's being still implemented, and along with that, there are sections on citizenship privacy, right? Which is going to impact education settings about student privacy.
Yeah.
So stuff like that, I try to keep an eye out on, like a healthy variety of things without, overwhelming yourself. Sometimes you're like, that's enough. I don't want to, deal with it for a weekend, and don't feel guilty about taking that weekend off.
Yeah. And I think that's true for anything. Even those listening that maybe aren't AI as passionate as I am or you, or I think whatever we're learning, I think it's all for anything we're doing to take that pause and get away from it. And I think we don't always do that enough, which is I think why we see also a lot of exhaustion and burnout in a lot of different fields right now, and we feel that pressure.
I like to read books as well, because it gives you a bit more well-researched, more in-depth analysis. The one that I've been reading, it's called The Atlas of AI. I don't know if you I think is it Kate Crawford? So it talks about like AI actually has a lot of physical costs, right? It's actually depleting resources. It's actually exploiting humans, and it gives you a historical perspective as well. It's not just I wanted to draw parallels between the Industrial Revolution to what's currently happening now. And so it gives you that historical perspective of what's been happening, and what we're seeing. It's actually nothing new. It's a continuation of that.
Right. Yes, that is a wonderful book. I just read that. I finished that up about a month ago. And,
Yeah.
I was like, oh man, there's a lot more to this that
Right?
I haven't quite considered or thought of enough, in terms of what does it mean for just, Mother Nature and Earth. I mean,
Well, and also, like, do you realize, like, when AI vendors are like promising the world to you, there's an opportunity cost, right? There's a cost associated with it. It's not just something abstract, and we need to kind of ask more questions and be more critical about it. I think, if anything else, the message from, like, to everybody is, like, be more critical.
yes.
Don't just, there's so much hype that talks AI up, but, like, don't take it at face value.
Right. I love that. And I think that's a fantastic thought nugget to wrap this up, to be respectful of your time, to continue to be critical
Yes.
of what we're being sold, what the answers are being, word vomited to us if we're going into ChatGPT for responses, or anything else that comes our way. And so, Stella Lee, this has been absolutely what a wonderful conversation. I so appreciate you carving out time. And as I like to end, if someone's sitting at a red
Thank
light
you.
and they want to add you to their network and start learning from you right now, all the stuff will be in the show notes. But in case they want to know more, where are some of the best places for them to follow your work, see what's happening, especially with this framework and your AI educator guide, as well as just all the other things you've got going on? Where are the spots to be?
Yeah. First of all, don't text and drive. But but if you're sitting at home,
Yeah.
I am at paradoxlearning.com. I put my resources for free up there on the resource section, or the blog section. I also I try to keep up with my own blogs. Not always easy. More up to date info, I do engage on LinkedIn quite regularly. And I post updates there as well. So LinkedIn is probably the best way to keep up, say hi, and if you guys are doing anything of interest, especially on AI literacy, I love to hear from you.
Perfect. Well, I can't thank you enough for this conversation, and I can't wait for people to hear this, check out the framework, and keep moving in all our learning journey. So thank you again for your time.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been fun. Thanks.
Hey y'all. Woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning, chilling with coffee mugs, me and coffee chugs, talking education all across the nation, pushing boundaries, thinking innovation. Chaos.